another episode of Getting to My Enough, the book that was recently published by Dr. Marie Brown Mercadel, and it's a memoir about her traumatic experiences through childhood, but also focusing on how she triumphed through it. And so we're back with another episode, and in this time in our discussion, we're going to cover a little bit of some of the chapters that we covered in the last session, in our last discussion, because there's some opportunities to explore a little more. And I know people are really interested in digging a little deeper. So Marie, I hope you don't mind if we revisit chapters 18 and 19 so that we can talk a little bit more about that. Okay, good. Thank you so much. So as I said, welcome back. Hi, Marie. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well, Tori. I'm still excited about the book. I've been getting a lot of really great feedback, a lot of questions. Sometimes the questions are offline. Sometimes people are sending me emails because they're just really curious and don't have the opportunity to ask all the questions that they want to, when we're having our discussions in the Sip and Heels. But I'm just very excited and I remain grateful for this opportunity to have this discussion and to do this podcast and to hopefully continue to allow other people to give themselves time to heal and to move forward from their own trauma and their own journeys throughout life.
Well, before we get into the book, I wanted to backtrack just a little bit and talk about something that we mentioned in our last discussion, and it was the Sip and Heal, your in-person book discussions. And I know you've been on the road again, and you've been promoting the book, and you've been having more Sip and Heal book discussions. So can you tell me a little bit how the last couple of sessions gone? What type of dialogue is occurring at these events? Just can you fill us in a little bit more about this?
Tori, I'm so excited about the Sip and Heal events. It's a little overwhelming too, if you think about it. And I'll tell you why I say that. There's so many women out there that are telling me their stories, and sometimes they're telling me stories for the first time. And so I've been so far in Dallas, Los Angeles, San Diego, Atlanta, here in Charlotte. And as a matter of fact, I'm going back to San Diego this weekend. I have 4 events in San Diego this weekend. And to be able to speak to women about my story, and then most importantly about their own survival story, it's really humbling to me. There are so many women that are sharing their survival stories for the first time. And I am looking forward to having some of those women on our show for later episodes that want to tell their own story. And talk about their own sense of healing and how they're getting to their enough and how they're releasing that shame of the things that happened to them in childhood. And sometimes I feel like the Sip and Heals don't last long enough because there's always people that stay after and they want to talk. And the great thing is I always offer resources. I have a listing of resources that are available for them to reach out to try to find local therapists or local services in their area, because there is such a great need for us to be able to have more transparent conversations about our own mental health and our own trauma and our own journey and survival stories.
Great. Well, thank you for discussing a little bit about that. And for people who were excited to hear that, Dr. Marie's going to be back in San Diego, I know I am, and there are going to be 4 Sip and Heal sessions here in this coming weekend. I know there are people who don't live in San Diego and who may be interested in hosting their own Sip and Heals. And I encourage them to go check out the website for more information about upcoming events and the locations that might be near them, or to learn how they can host their own event. I know you really want to host more of these events so that you can help, women share and explore healing opportunities for healing and tap into some of those resources that you were talking about. So I just encourage people to visit your website, and so that they can learn how to host their own event in their own city if one of the upcoming ones is not near enough to them. So now I want to get back to this great book. I have it in my hand, And I'm sure everybody can see all these tabs. Some of them are folded in because we've already discussed it. Can you see those tabs? I have them all in here because everything.
Yeah, so you've been reading and rereading. You might know some of the content just as well as I do.
You know what? Every time I read a chapter, I'm like, I learned something new. And, I know you've been very open with me, and I feel like I've learned a lot about you over the years that we've gotten to know each other. But this book is really, it really goes deep and it explores and it reveals a lot about your history. So I wanted to thank you for that. And I know in our last episode we talked about, we covered chapters 18 and 19. And as I said before, I want to revisit them a little bit because those were really key periods in your life. I mean, you graduated high school, you dropped out of college, you got married, you gave birth to your beautiful daughter Chantel, then you got divorced, and you struggled through a series of dead-end jobs, and then you started to turn things around. You graduated from college and you met your wonderful love, Mr. Alvin Mercadel, and you guys remarried. And so I want to talk about, after you transitioned, when you got through all of those experiences, and then here you are, you've got this wonderful husband, beautiful daughter, career is on track, things are going for you. So I want to revisit chapters 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, because there were a few more challenges that you experienced. So, particularly in your marriage. And the reason why I want to say this, because I know that people who are sometimes dealing with traumatic experiences, those experiences affect their relationships. And with you, you have this new marriage, and then you've relocated to Texas. So how were you, what challenges were you experiencing at this time? Like particularly chapter 18, it talks about being in the not so great state of Texas. Tell me a little bit more about that and the challenges you experienced.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit earlier, but after 10 years my 10 years after my divorce, I remarried and once again found myself living in the state of Texas. As you mentioned, chapter 18 is titled The Not So Great State of Texas, because my husband and I struggled for some time while we were there. As a matter of fact, when we got married, he was already in Texas and I was living in North Carolina. And I left my job in my home that I had there to move with him. And so there were some parallels to my first marriage. My first husband, we were stationed in San Antonio, Texas, and this time I was living in Dallas, Texas. My first husband had a job that demanded around the clock work as a drill instructor. Sometimes he might go to work at 4 a.m. or sometimes he might not go to work until 12 in the afternoon, but he was working, 14, 15, 16 hours a day. And it was very similar too with Alvin in his job as a military recruiter. And Alvin was just as committed to his job as I was to mine. And failure was not an option for him because of his own personal goals. And also because he had a goal to retire from the Marine Corps at the rank of E9, which is Master Gunnery Sergeant. And so to be deemed a successful assignment, he had to consistently average 3 new recruits a month, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot because there's a lot of qualifications that you have to go in to be in the military. And so his job was very, very demanding. I also had a new job, very demanding job at a troubled organization. And I was also working a lot of hours. Chantel was adjusting to moving 1,500 miles away from her aunts and cousins, and now she has a stepdad. So it was really challenging. Our communication wasn't the greatest. Our time together was limited. Sometimes I felt like we were like 2 ships passing in the night. We were both under a great deal of stress. I'm adjusted to trying to figure out how to live with someone after being single for 10 years. And I had relationships and I had boyfriends, but I hadn't ever gotten close, like really close to marriage. And so there was an adjustment. It was an adjustment for me. It was an adjustment for him. And the stress level was just completely through the roof.
So when you moved to Texas, it sounds like there was a disconnect in a way between you and your husband. Was there? And if so, can you talk a little bit more about that?
There was absolutely a disconnect, not just because of the job and our hours, but I think we were learning how to be married.
No.
My husband has a very, very strong personality. For anybody that knows him, anybody that knows me also knows that I have a very, very strong personality. So coming from an adjustment where I'm living alone and raising my daughter, and now I'm moving to another state that's foreign and really brand new. I'm not spending a lot of time with my husband. We did get to spend some time together, but not a lot of quality time. He had one day off. And so, I might have been, ready to get up and go and paint the town on that one day, but, it just wasn't feasible. And the communication was really, really not there. The stress level was high. It's said that the first year of marriage is the most difficult year of marriage. And I would say the first, 2 to 3 years of marriage for us were really difficult. We were teetering on the edge of breakup a lot of times. And I was very unhappy in Texas. And I just had a bad aura about living there in general. And I think maybe there was some residual feelings from my previous stay in Texas because it didn't end well. My first marriage also ended in Texas. And so when we finally received orders to go to California, I was ready to go because I wanted to try to get to a sense of normalcy. I was tired of working 60 hours a week. My daughter was still, young at that time. She was in middle school. And his work schedule too was just the job was stressful. We weren't communicating. Probably most of the things that you think could go wrong in a new marriage were going wrong in a new marriage.
Yeah, talking about going wrong. So like you had this sort of disconnect in terms of because how busy you both were with your schedules, you didn't have that much time to connect as a couple. And then also you had already been living 10 years on your own with Chantel and that period of adjustment, and the same for him, moving to a new state, new wife, new stepchild, even though deeply in love, there was something else that happened that threatened your marriage besides the disconnect. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, I was excited that we were leaving Texas. I was ready to go. And I was even more excited to go to California because of course I went to high school in California. So I had some foundation there and I knew some people in California. And so, I was ready to transition out. And when it was time for us to leave, before it was time for us to leave, Alvin informed me that he had had an affair and that there was a child born as a result of that affair. And I vividly recall the combined emotions of rage and pain. And I was really floored because it's not something that I was expecting from him. I knew that we have some challenges and some issues, but that just was not something that I was prepared for.
How did you deal with that? I mean, I can imagine, yeah, there's a lot of pain and rage but how did you handle it? I mean, because clearly you're still married to the lovely man. What did you do at that time to manage your feelings so that you just didn't throw up your hands and walk away?
I I was completely devastated. We didn't have any children of our own. We still didn't have any biological children together. My plan at that time was to have a child at some point. I was considering the impact of the affair, not only on our relationship, but on, all of our children. The feedback that I could potentially get from my family and friends. I was fighting humiliation. I mean, there were so many emotions, just anger, disappointment, embarrassment, fear, rage, all of
Mhm.
those things that you could possibly think about. I experienced all of those. I experienced all of those things. And I think there was also a certain amount of numbness
Mm.
that also set into. And just kind of rotely going through that time period. Um, because I didn't know what I didn't know in that moment what I was going to do.
Mm.
And I didn't know how I was going to do it. And I listened to his rationale and his excuses and his apologies and all of those things. And um, none of those were viable to me. But I knew that I couldn't live in the place of pain and rage because that was going to hurt me more than it was going to hurt, anybody else. And so I just kind of moved along so that I could decide what I was going to do ultimately.
So you stayed, and you're pondering what you're going to do, what you were ultimately going to do. But I mean, but how did you get through the day to day and
Mhm.
manage to keep everything together? Because feelings like betrayal, and that's incredibly painful. And I'm wondering, how did you manage to get through all that? Because I'm thinking about the first part of your book. You got through a lot of traumatic and challenging events in your life, but this one blindsided you.
Yeah.
What did you do to keep it together?
You know, the interesting thing is, Tori, is I think that, two things. The trauma that I experienced in the first half of my life gave me a certain inner strength, if you will, but it also built a shield and a wall.
Okay.
And sometimes that wall kept things from deeply penetrating, and I could just kind of block things off, right? It's like you could see me right now, right? You don't see this brick wall. You don't see it. But it's here, and it's made of concrete, and the bricks are 5 or 6 layers deep. But it's here. So we moved to California, and we made attempts to build our relationship. It was hard, and there were so many times where I started to pack up and leave, and I felt like Alvin was responsible. He should have made better decisions. He was the person that I was holding responsible.
Mhm.
Um, we went through marital counseling 2 different times while we were in California. My trust was broken. I was angry. And for a bit of time, I even spent time wondering if it was my fault.
Okay.
I think that's very common for men or women, because, both men and women have had to deal with infidelity in relationships, right? And so I think one of the first things that people do, or one of the second things after they get angry and pissed off, is wonder if it was something that they did or did not do, or if there was anything that they were lacking in their relationship. Um, so, when I questioned whether or not it was because of something that I had or had not done, when I look back, it was the internalized self doubt that I developed during my childhood that caused me to question if I was to blame. I didn't stay there very long because realistically, I knew that this behavior was about him and not about me. The first 2 to 3 years in California were rough. And within that time, he was deployed to the Middle East twice. Once right after 9/11. He came home after being gone for 7 months, and then something else happened. And probably about 3 months later, he ended up having to go back again for another 8 months. And what was interesting about those times is that we stayed in communication multiple times a day. We emailed a lot, we talked when we could. Um, and so the distance, I think, really saved us a lot because we both needed time to understand ourselves better, define what the relationship would be moving forward. Um, but for the first, 2 or 3 years, I wasn't even sure if I was going to stay. And so I was moving forward, but I was still standing still in some respects.
Mm.
And, I had an amazing position with the county, and I decided to get my master's degree in management during that time. And I was just moving through. And what's interesting, Tori, is that 50 to 60% of marriages survive infidelity. That's a very huge number.
Yeah, I had no idea. Wow,
50
that's
to
an interesting
60%.
statistic.
It's estimated that around 20% of marriages end in divorce because of infidelity, but 50 to 60% of marriages survive. And I don't know if that's because people just come to a greater level of acceptance, or if people just recognize that people are people, and people are human, and people make mistakes.
Mhm.
And it's like, I know that you've heard the phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I committed to continuing to stay to work through it, but I didn't commit to staying forever. Um, I committed to, as long as we were both putting in the work, I committed to to trying to move past it. And that's what I did. That's what I did.
Yeah, and it was good to see that in chapter 19 that, when you got to California, you realized, okay, I need to make a commitment. I need to figure a couple things out. And that you also have these new opportunities in terms of advancing your education and deciding to get your master's degree in management. I mean, that was a key move to you dealing with deciding where you wanted to go next in life, and then also keeping yourself busy while your husband was deployed.
Mhm.
And I thought that was great. But then also, when you mentioned that you talking about moving forward, I mean, that's chapter 20. So you're talking about um moving forward and wanting to get through this. So I just I thought it was great that you really decided not to ditch the marriage, that you said, you recognize that people make mistakes. um
Mhm.
and then I love the fact that you continue to focus on yourself.
Mhm.
And like, so moving from chapter 20 to chapter 21, um the the title of that chapter is Life is a Gift, Living is a Blessing. And I love how I mentioned this before, how in each chapter you start off with a quote. I think I mentioned that in episodes 1 and 2. And I want to read this, where for chapter 21 you say each person makes a choice about whether their life contributions will have a positive or negative impact on society. So,
Mhm.
in chapters 19 and 20, you're talking about positive or negative impact on your marriage.
Mhm.
And then you're also taking that same focus and that insight and thinking about positive or negative impact on society. And so you're continuing with your education. And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the things that I also talked about during this time period, and moving forward and standing still, is I went to a conference in 2002, and that's when I first learned about adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs study. And I learned about the traumatic events that occur between the ages of birth and 17 years of age that have lifelong impacts or can have lifelong impacts on children as adults when they move into adulthood and how they develop. And so the ACEs survey is in the book, but basically there's 10 survey questions. There was a study that was done, partnership with Kaiser Permanente and the Center for Disease Control, and it included 17,000 adults. And these 10 questions basically ask about your exposure to things such as domestic violence, sexual abuse, poverty, living with a family member that had behavioral health issues, or if they were incarcerated, or those types of things. And so during this time period, as you mentioned, I'm still working on myself, still getting educated. I'm back in graduate school and I'm doing well. One part of my life is thriving while the other is kind of hanging in limbo. And what I learned during that time was really starting to put a identify medically, psychologically, socially some of the traumas that I experienced as a child and how they impacted me as an adult. And that's when I began to think about how I needed to also look more at my own emotional well-being. Because before that, I didn't make the connection between my early childhood trauma and some of the decisions that I made as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And it was as though a light bulb went off around that time period for me. And as I started to think about my own reactions to previous trauma, my current reaction to this traumatic experience that I had in my relationship and my marriage, and my own learned behaviors of self-protection, then I started to recognize, right? Not that I didn't already know this, but people are imperfect, and imperfect people do imperfect things. And you start to make these decisions about, well, how can I navigate, this current situation in my marriage? How can I consciously gain the mental strength that I need to work through this, to commit to working through this, but not committing to staying through any other events that would be traumatic for me in this relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to become stronger. I took my decision to stay in the marriage seriously. I took my decision as one that I did not take lightly because, obviously I could have made the decision to leave at any time. I was educated. I was financially stable. I was smart. I was independent. I had lived on my own before. So financially, I didn't need to stay in the marriage, but I loved him, and I wanted to work, and that's why we went through therapy. Because sometimes even professionals need professionals, right?
Right.
And it was difficult because some days we walked around the house in complete silence. Sometimes we still do that, unfortunately. Um,
I noticed that, yeah, that was great in chapter 22, how you talked about that you both said, because it was one thing when you committed to staying in the marriage, but he committed too. You both
Okay.
went to therapy.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's important because a lot of times people, when they're experiencing challenges in relationships, they always think, oh, I'm doing all the heavy lifting, or it's just me. But he did the work too. He was willing to try and um, undo some of the emotional harm his actions caused that resulted
Mhm,
out of
mhm,
that.
mhm.
And so, and
Right.
I liked that you guys said we're going to do this together. Chapter
Mhm,
22 is titled "Let's Do This Together," and
mhm,
I feel like not only did you have this growth and awareness through your education and your work experience, it seems that he also had this
mhm,
growth and awareness.
mhm. I mean, going to therapy is a big deal. I mean, especially for Black men, right?
Hmm.
Especially for type A, macho, um, strong-willed, prideful Black men.
Hmm.
And for me, the same too, because again, I'm a professional. I'm managing people at this point, and I've got this high level position. But I recognize that there was not something that I could do. This was not something that I could do on my own. We could not do it together. And part of that too is that we both have such strong personalities, and those strong personalities clash sometimes. And after 27 years, they still clash, and it's
Hmm.
still a balance. And therapy is something that's always on the table for us, even today, 27 years later, because um, I think it's important and I think it's necessary. I think that your own mental health is important. When you're married, you have to consider your partner's mental health. You have to consider your mental health together. And so, some people decide that they're going to work through infidelity in their marriage, and some people decide that they're not. I think it's a personal choice, and I think everybody has to make their own decisions. I think that the difference between me, I think I've said this before, and other people that have experienced it is that I'm transparent about it, um, because it can happen to anybody.
Hmm.
And I think, again, the first thing that we do is we think about, was there something that we did wrong? And I can tell you unequivocally today that it had nothing to do with anything that I was doing wrong. But at the same time, I needed to understand a lot of things about myself and my acceptance level in this relationship. When that happened, and so that's why therapy was important. That's why therapy was important to me.
Well, thank you so much for revisiting chapters 18 and 19 and talking about chapters 20, 21, and 22 and the challenges you experienced and what decisions you made and what thoughts went into those decisions that you made to help um, strengthen your relationship and your resolve to stay with this man you love and to be forgiving, to, even though forgiveness we know is a challenge. I know it's easier said than done, but that you were
Mhm,
able to do that. And that you also not only recommitted to your marriage, but you recommitted to your education, to your own self personal development.
mhm,
And so when we come back in the next episode, we're going to talk about the good times,
mhm.
how the good times roll. I'm not going to try and say it in French. I'm better with Spanish, but we're going to continue this discussion about you getting to your enough and chapters 23 through 26 are next in our discussion. But before we go, Marie, if you can just wrap up and give our listeners some key insights that you think that might benefit them as they are going through their own personal journeys.
So I really just want to encourage other women and men to open up about their own traumatic experiences, their own behavior health needs. I want to continue to reiterate that, Black mental health is so critical. Historically, in our cultures, we don't talk a lot about mental health. We don't talk a lot about therapy and getting therapy. And one of the challenges I'm actually having is finding, in fact, therapists of color in some of the areas that I'm having the sip and heals. And that's also a barrier to people getting help because, obviously you want to have people who understand your culture and your background when you go for therapy. However, what I also want to encourage people is, don't discount a therapist because they're not of color. There's some very, very well-trained therapists and very highly experienced and educated therapists that I have on my list that are also available. And so I just want to encourage people to think about their own story and think about their own journey with adverse life experiences and relationship issues and career challenges. And I want them to know that, you can heal. Everybody goes through something in life. I don't think any of us are going to be lucky enough to not have some experience. My experience may look different from yours. My response to my experience may look different than your response, but that's okay. I think what I just want to help people understand is that it's okay to not be okay. And sometimes we're not okay. And I want to teach people how to affirm themselves and how to recognize that they are enough. I just got ordered a personalized license plate for a car, and it says, I am enough.
Nice.
So I'm very excited about getting that license plate. And I'm hoping that someone stops me and asks me, what's it about? And, we can continue that conversation. And I also want to make sure that the listeners know that, if you're not feeling okay, speak to someone in your circle so that you can get some support. If you can't speak to someone in your circle, then maybe look outside your circle. Go to a professional, go to clergy, go to your pastor, go to your mentor. But please don't suffer in silence. Don't try to be a martyr. Don't try to be a hero. Take off that cape that we wear sometimes as women.
Right.
Way, right? And we're super mom and super wife and super friend and super employee and super volunteer and super all these things. And then when we look up, we have not kept anything for ourselves. And so I encourage people to go and purchase a book on my website, which is www.mercadelconsultingsolutions.net. And I think we're going to have that displayed at the end of our podcast as well. And I also just want to thank you again, Tori, for this opportunity that you're giving me and other listeners to hear about this story. And one of the things I'm really, really looking forward to is having some of these women on our show.
Yes.
I have met in the Sip and Heals. And I think that's really probably going to be the best part for me because I just want the story to keep going. I just want the conversation, to keep going. My goal is to hit every state with Sip and Heals. So I encourage people to go to my website, reach out. If you're interested in holding an event for me, then let's talk and I'm there.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marie, for these insights and key takeaways. And I hope that if the listeners who haven't purchased the book yet do, because it's a good read. And then also engage with us. Tell us what you think about these episodes, and also stick around because, as Marie mentioned, we're going to have some guests who are also going to talk about their experiences and their personal journeys of resilience. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you, and we will see you next time.
And one more thing, Tori,
Okay.
we have so many views. We have so many views of our first videos. I would just like to encourage people to hit the subscribe button.
Yes, that too.
Please.
Thank you.
Yeah. hit the subscribe button, please.
Yes.
We really appreciate you doing that, and also sharing the link with your friends that we may not have been able to reach on Facebook or Instagram. But please share. Please share and subscribe. So thank you so much. We look forward to hearing from you, and enjoy the rest of your morning, evening, afternoon, or whatever time you're listening.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye bye.